Hello, I'm Leslyn Elliott, mathematics specialist attached to NSERD. In this episode, we will be looking at designing lesson plans for mathematics using the new lesson plan template. This new lesson plan template covers areas that we would have addressed prior when we used our previous lesson plan template. But with this new template, the teacher will be able to make more connections between themselves and the learners. The teachers will also be able to make connections between teachers and parents, because this template allows the teacher to deliberately plan for the learner's success. So let's get straight into the plan. Now I have selected grade 4. We know our subject is mathematics, and I have selected a grade 4 class to present this lesson plan. My strand is geometry, and our strands are usually numbered, as well as the key areas. So for this geometry topic that I'm going to select, it comes from the section G 1.1, which is the first section of the geometry strand. Now, what do I want my learners to do today? Because I'm teaching them geometry from that particular strand today. All right, for our lesson plan, we want them to be able to identify plane shapes and discuss their properties. So that is exactly what I'm going to write at the top here for my objective. Just what I want to achieve at the end of today's lesson. It will be for pupils to identify plane shapes and discuss their properties. Now, where did I get that from? If we go to our curriculum guide, Geometry G 1.1, we will see all our specific learning outcomes there. So we took our objective out of that. And for the SEOs, we would have taken them as they are from the curriculum guide. We did not modify any of them. So in the curriculum guide, we have 2 SEOs there, which I lifted and put in my SEO column on the knowledge, because that is what I want them to know at the end of the lesson. That is what I want to teach them. So when they leave here today, they must leave being able to do just this. Then I also want them to acquire some skills during this lesson. Some skills that I would like them to have. I would like them to accurately describe shapes. I would like them to practice active listening and be able to compare and contrast plane shapes. I also want them, because this enhanced curriculum is big on promoting values, I want them to also leave with some values. So I'm going to place some emphasis on 2 values for this lesson. I would want them to work collaboratively, as well as to appreciate each other's ideas. So that completes our section on specific learning outcomes. Let's go to the next session. Needs of diverse learner. Who are the learners I have to plan for in this class separately? Now, I have my strategies that I will use for the entire class. Planning this lesson, I would have recognized that I have some learners who have sight problems, and I need to plan differently for those learners. So they have a little diversity. Then I also have another learner who doesn't speak English language fluently. So I have to consider the 2 of them for this particular lesson. In another lesson, they may not be the diverse learners for that lesson. But for this particular lesson, what I'm doing, I need to consider them differently. So for those with sight problem, I'm going to have larger versions of the pictures so that they can manipulate them easily and they can see what's there clearly. And for the 2 students who have the language problems, I'm going to have them sit next to two friends who they're very comfortable with. And they will help them. So that's how I'm going to plan for them. Now we go to our next session. How can observation or conversation or products be used in this lesson? Now, we have an anchor, which we will use. We will observe learners as they search and describe shapes in a variety of ways. And remember, one of the skills we want to come out, we said we want them to accurately describe these shapes. And we want them to practice active listening. So while some learners are talking, others have to be listening for key terms and key areas that come out. And we want them to be able to answer questions. We want them to be able to create a picture. So that is how we're going to use those formative assessment strategies in this area. Now for the components of the lesson. As I mentioned, we have a hook. Our hook, which we will use to introduce the lesson, will be a book, a book which we used in the language lesson as well as in the comprehension lesson. And that book is the Greedy Triangle. So they are quite au fait with that book. They would have answered questions from the book during the language lesson. So we are now integrating that into our math lesson. Time to teach. Time to teach. So for time to teach, we should allot about 10 to 14 minutes for our lesson there. What do we do in time to teach? We do just what it says. We teach. Now, in teaching during time to teach, we can ask the children questions also to bring out the concept, or we can give it to them. So for our math lesson today, in time to teach, we will be searching a variety of shapes because we'll have a shape hunt where they find these shapes, bring all of them to their groups. They will be regular shapes, some irregular, and they sort them based on the number of sides or any particular attribute we want them to use. So that's the first thing we'll do. Then we'll ask them to group them, then have a class discussion on each group. That class discussion will entail justifying why some shapes are put in that group. And in that way, they will be able to identify common attributes of some shapes. Now, for example, they might want to put all the blue shapes together, be they triangles, be they all the blue triangles, plus bottom line is that they selected an attribute, they selected the color. So they're sorting them according to color, or they can sort them according to size. The bottom line is that they must be able to talk about those shapes. They must be able to draw outlines of those shapes because we're talking about plane shapes. Then after we would have completed that 10 to 14 minutes of teaching them, asking them questions, having them interact, engage deeply in the activities, we will go on to time to practice. Yes, time to practice is where we have the children do exactly what they come to school to do their work and not having the teacher do their math for them. So for this math lesson, the first thing we would want to do during time to practice is to see if they understand what they did when they were sorting the shape during the time I was being the instructor of the class, telling them what to do. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have them do group work where they would create a large picture that resembles any object, cartoon character, object from the environment, vehicles, animals, any object. Then they will complete this chart below, stating the shapes they would have used. For example, if they would have used triangles in their shape, they will write the word triangle, then they count how many triangles they would have used. They go to quadrilaterals, they count how many quadrilaterals they use, and for quads, if they want to get into, say, well, I use parallelograms or I use rhombus, it's up to them, no problem, but they will continue like that, check to see if they use pentagons and so, and we go on to hexagon for this class. When they would have finished that, complete that, you would have noticed that in my time to teach and my time to practice, I did not do exactly the same thing. I did not give them the shapes to sort again. We did that, but now we went a step further in time to practice. They were given the opportunity to go even beyond what I would have them learned earlier in time to teach. So there is where the learners have their opportunity to bring out the creativity in them, to show us that they know deeply what we would have given them to, what we would have exposed them to during the time to teach section. At the end of time to practice, it's time for us to reflect and share. In time to reflect and share now, for this lesson, we will go to another activity, an activity that was not done during the time to teach time nor during the time to practice. We will have them do something else, because during time to reflect and share, we need to spend only 3 to 5 minutes there. So we cannot go back to what we would have done before. Anyway, we will have, for this lesson, we looked at them doing a dice toss where they have 2 dice. They will throw the dice, and if they have maybe a 3 and a 4, they try to write down the name of that plane shape, the name of that polygon. And the first person to reach to have 4 shapes written down, that group will be the winner. So that's for time to practice. And you may find too that in some of your lessons, your math lessons, when it's time to reflect and share, everybody may not have the chance to answer. Everybody may not have the chance to contribute, because it's only 5 minutes of wrapping up time. So that's why a group activity, a little game is good enough here, or you can just do random selection, maybe toss a ball to somebody and ask them what polygon they remember from the figure and describe the side or so. But you find activities similar to that, because everybody cannot participate during this time to reflect and share. And another thing I would love for the teachers to take note, in time to reflect and share, it's not for the teachers to share. We want the learners to share what they would have learned during the math lesson. We want them to share what they would have understood, and we also would like to hear from them areas that they are not comfortable with during the math lesson. Then we go on to how the lesson includes the learner's context. Now, we don't teach in isolation, and this new curriculum is really promoting teaching within the learner's context, meaning that whatever we teach them, we have to help them to understand where it came from and how it relates to their daily lives. So, for this particular math lesson, we would have had learners do interact with plane shapes on a daily basis. They see squares, triangles on the floor in the classroom, on the walls in the classroom. They look at the windows, and they can relate to those plane shapes. How the lesson integrates with other subjects. This particular lesson brings out a lot of vocabulary that they can transfer to language. Then the fact that we would have started with an anchor that we used during the language arts lesson, during the literacy lesson, then they would have their words and meaning, creating new sentences, and so. For art and craft, they can do their collage using the plane shapes that they would have formed their objects with. Social studies, they can relate to the importance of shapes to our community. Shapes when you're making a costume, shapes when you're even going to the tailors or the seamstress. Resources. This lesson was not big on very expensive resources. For our math lesson here today, we use cutout of plane shapes, which we give to them, because let us say we don't have those fancy pattern tiles. So what we did, we make our cutouts and we use those. We also use crayon to color them, so we have similar colors. And for our anchor text, we use the one that we already had from the language arts or the literacy lesson, and we had our dice. For our final reflection for this math lesson, after we would have listened to what the learners would have said during time when they reflected and shared, we would know how to plan for them for the next lesson. We would know now, okay, from these plain shapes, yes, I recognize that they have spatial sense or they have spatial ability, so I can move on. Or I may say, I did not do a good job, even though I was supposed to have these larger pictures, my pictures were not large enough, and I need to teach over part of this lesson. So when we do our final reflection as teachers, we are really looking to see how this is going to prepare us for the next math lesson. Having discussed all of this, we have now come to the end of this episode where we discussed using the new lesson plan template to design lesson plans for mathematics.